My name is Amanda Parker, and if you met me today, you'd probably think I have it all together, married to a wonderful man named Mark, a beautiful little girl named Lily, and a cozy home filled with laughter and love. But the truth is, this version of me was carved out of betrayal, heartbreak, and a vow I made to myself years ago, the day my world quietly cracked open at the seams. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my teenage life, my high school graduation. The sky was clear, the air buzzing with excitement and camera flashes. I remember walking across that stage, hearing my name echo through the loudspeakers, and locking eyes with Mark in the crowd. He smiled with such pride I felt invincible for just a second. That moment didn't last. After the ceremony, I was still in my cap and gown, taking photos with friends when Sandra, my stepmom, called me over. Her smile was the kind she always wore when she was about to deliver bad news but wanted to look gracious doing it. Her lips tight, eyes too bright. "Amanda," she said, tilting her head in that way she did when she was pretending to care. "I need to talk to you, just for a moment." We stepped away from the crowd, near the edge of the football field. My heart still fluttering from all the cheers, I didn't expect her words to slice the way they did. "I need you to know that the college fund your dad left behind, it won't be yours after all." I blinked at her, my breath catching. "What?" She didn't even look uncomfortable. "Ian and I talked, and we believed the money would be better used for something more practical." I tried to laugh. "Sandra, that fund was set up for me. My dad told me himself, he opened it the year I started middle school." Sandra shrugged, like we were discussing leftovers in the fridge. "Ian has a plan. He wants to start a business, something your father would be proud of." I could barely process what she was saying. "Sandra, that money is mine. Dad wanted me to go to college." Ian chose that moment to wander over, his hands in his pockets, smug grin in place like he knew this was coming. He'd always been the golden child. Not even my full brother, we shared the same father, but growing up, it felt like I was the outsider in my own home. Ian chimed in, voice smooth as ever. "Amanda, come on. I'll make good use of it. I'm not wasting it, this is for a business. You can always take out student loans. Everyone does." I felt dizzy. My hands were trembling. "You're stealing from me." Sandra looked around quickly, clearly aware people might hear us. "Lower your voice," she hissed. "This is family business. And you're being dramatic." Dramatic. That was always the word she used to dismiss me. I felt like I'd been slapped. I left without another word. My graduation party happened without me. I sat on my bed in my cap and gown until the sun went down, trying not to cry too loud in case they heard. My father had died a year earlier, and I had no one left to stand up for me. The man who believed in me, who had started that fund so I wouldn't have to struggle, was gone, and the people who claimed to love me were dismantling everything he left behind. The next day, I tried again. I stood in the kitchen while Sandra made coffee, thinking maybe she'd reconsider. "That money was for my future," I said, quietly. "Please, just don't do this." She didn't even look up from her mug. "Amanda, you're an adult now. Time to figure things out on your own. The money is for the family. Ian's part of the family too." Mark was the only one who listened. We'd been dating for about a year, and when I told him what happened, he was furious. "This is theft," he said. "You have to fight back." But what could I do? The account was legally in Sandra's name. No lawyer would take my case without money. And I didn't want to drag my father's memory through a courtroom battle I couldn't afford to lose. So I let it go. At least, that's what I told myself. I got a job at a coffee shop, then another as a waitress. I enrolled in community college and scraped by, semester after semester. Sandra and Ian stopped mentioning the fund altogether, as if it had never existed. Ian, meanwhile, launched his business, which amounted to renting office space for a startup that flopped 6 months later. Sandra still bragged about him at family gatherings. "Your brother is so ambitious," she'd say, side-eyeing me across the room. "You could learn a thing or two from him." I learned. I learned how to survive without them. I learned how to push through exhaustion, how to keep going when every part of me wanted to give up. And through it all, Mark was there, steady, patient, believing in me even when I didn't. By the time I transferred to a university, we were engaged. Sandra raised her eyebrows when she found out. "Marriage? So soon?" she asked. "Amanda, you're still figuring things out." Ian snorted. "You should focus on your career, if you can even call it that." I smiled, said nothing. But inside, I was making another promise. I would build a life so full, so joyful, that one day, they would choke on their words. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Ian wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Years later, when Lily was born, Ian would cross a line so vile, so unforgivable, it would break every fragile thread still connecting us. By the time I finished my degree, Mark and I had been married for a year. We didn't have much, an apartment with peeling paint, second-hand furniture, and dreams too big for our space, but we had each other. That sounds cliché, I know, but after years of feeling alone in a house where I was supposed to belong, being loved without conditions felt like a revolution. We wanted to start a family almost immediately. I think it was my way of reclaiming something I lost, proof that I could create the kind of life I'd always longed for. When I got pregnant with Lily, everything felt right again. I still remember the first time I saw her tiny heartbeat on that black and white screen. Mark squeezed my hand, his eyes filled with tears. She was real. Ours. But news travels fast in families, even ones built on grudges. When Sandra found out I was expecting, she called for the first time in months. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind that coats poison. "Oh, Amanda," she cooed, "we're just so thrilled for you." Ian was especially excited. You know, he's always loved kids. That made my stomach twist. Ian had never cared about kids. He barely acknowledged my pregnancy at all, until now. Something about her tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. Maybe, just maybe, they were trying to be better. I was wrong. After Lily was born, the first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, dirty diapers, and the kind of love that makes your chest ache. My whole world narrowed to her tiny fingers curling around mine and the soft rhythm of her breathing against my neck. Mark was incredible, changing diapers, making midnight bottles, whispering lullabies even when he couldn't remember the words. Then Sandra asked to visit. I hesitated. I'd kept my distance since the college fund betrayal, but Mark, always the peacemaker, convinced me to let her come. "Maybe it's a chance to rebuild," he said gently. She brought gifts. Expensive ones. A high-end stroller, monogrammed baby blankets, even a gold locket with Lily's initials engraved. I wanted to believe she meant well, but something about her presence felt invasive. Like she was staking a claim. Ian came with her the next time. He held Lily awkwardly, making exaggerated faces like he was trying to impress an audience. "She's a cutie," he said. "Looks just like me when I was a baby." I froze. Mark caught my eye, his brow furrowing. Lily looked nothing like Ian, she was a tiny replica of Mark, from her dark curls to her dimpled chin. But Ian kept saying it. Over and over. "She's got Parker genes. That's for sure." At first, I thought it was just his ego talking. Then came the comments that made my blood run cold. "You know, if anything ever happened to you two," Sandra said one day while rocking Lily, "Ian would be happy to step in. He has such a natural bond with her." Mark gently took Lily from her arms, his jaw tight. "Thanks, but Amanda and I have everything under control." We stopped inviting them after that. Months passed. I returned to work part-time, and we fell into a rhythm again. But something was always off. I started getting weird texts from unknown numbers. Just photos, Lily at the park, Lily through our kitchen window, Lily at daycare. No messages. No explanations. I went to the police. They said without a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. Could be a prank, the officer said with a shrug. Keep an eye out. I felt like I was losing my mind. Mark installed cameras. We changed our locks. But the photos kept coming. Then, one afternoon, I picked Lily up from daycare, and they told me she had already been picked up. By her uncle. My heart stopped. I was in full panic, screaming her name, dialing 911 with shaking hands. They found her 3 hours later, safe, thank God, at Sandra's house. Ian had forged my signature on an emergency contact form. Sandra acted like it was a misunderstanding. Amanda, darling, Ian was just helping. Lily seemed upset, and he didn't want to leave her there crying. I pressed charges. But Ian walked away with a slap on the wrist. Sandra bailed him out before the ink dried on the report. And I finally understood, this wasn't about Lily. Not entirely. It was about me. Ian had failed, at business, at school, at everything he tried. I had succeeded. And now, I had something he wanted. A child. A legacy. Something he believed belonged to him. That was the moment the fear turned to fury. I wasn't just protecting Lily anymore. I was preparing for a fight. What I didn't know yet was that Ian's twisted version of revenge was just getting started. For a while, things went quiet. After the incident at the daycare, we filed a restraining order. Sandra and Ian were banned from any contact with Lily or me. Mark and I doubled our security, new cameras, panic buttons, even a lawyer on retainer. I felt like I was living in a bunker rather than a home, but at least I could sleep knowing Lily was safe. Or so I thought. About 8 months later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. No note. Just a photograph of Ian, arms wrapped around a woman I didn't recognize, smiling like a man with nothing to hide. Taped to the back of the photo was a wedding invitation. Ian was getting married. At first, I thought it was a cruel joke. Why would he send this to me? But then, I noticed the name of the bride, Claire Bennett. Claire was my college roommate's younger sister. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered her vaguely, a quiet girl, sweet but easily influenced. The kind of girl Ian could charm with his big talk and hollow promises. The invitation included a line that made my skin crawl, "We hope you'll bring Lily so she can meet her new aunt." That was the tipping point. I didn't know how he'd found Claire or manipulated his way into her life, but something about this screamed wrong. I called Claire. She sounded surprised to hear from me. Amanda? Wow, it's been years. I kept my tone casual. Yeah, I know this is out of the blue. I just got your invitation. Congratulations. Oh, thanks, she said, her voice chipper. Ian's amazing. I'm really lucky. I wanted to scream. But instead, I asked, have you told him about the restraining order? She hesitated. He mentioned something about a misunderstanding with his sister. Said you'd overreacted after an argument and that it's all cleared up now. I nearly dropped the phone. I met Claire for coffee the next day. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. I just said Ian had a history she deserved to know, about the college fund, about his obsession with Lily, and about the time he forged my signature to take my daughter. She stared at me in disbelief. Why would he lie about something like that? I don't know, I said. But Claire, if you don't believe me, just watch how he reacts when you tell him we spoke. That night, she called me. Her voice was trembling. You were right. He freaked out. Said I was being paranoid, that you were trying to ruin his life. He grabbed my phone. I've never seen him like that. She paused. Amanda. I'm scared. I told her to get out. Immediately. She did. Packed a bag and went to stay with her sister. But she didn't cancel the wedding, not right away. Instead, she let it play out. She wanted proof. Something that would make everyone see Ian for who he really was. So we made a plan. Claire reconnected with him a week later, pretending to believe his story. She said she wanted to rebuild trust. He bought it, of course. Ian never saw beyond his own reflection. He thought he'd won. But she was recording everything. The manipulation. The veiled threats. The obsession with starting over with someone better than Amanda. And worst of all, the plan to try and get custody of Lily. He said it like it was inevitable. Once we're married, Ian said, we'll show the court Amanda's unstable. Sandra's already spoken to a lawyer. We just need to make Amanda slip up once, just once. That kid will be ours. Claire sent me the recording the night before the wedding. We sent it to the police. And we waited. The next day, dressed in a simple black dress and armed with a restraining order and a detective at my side, I showed up to Ian's wedding. Claire was already at the altar, bouquet in hand, standing stiff as a statue. The guests were confused when I walked in until the officers followed me. Sandra was in the front row, wearing pearls and that same smug expression she'd worn the day she told me my college fund was gone. Her smile froze as soon as she saw me. Ian turned from the altar. His face went pale. The detective stepped forward. Ian Parker? You're under arrest for forgery, violation of a court order, and conspiracy to commit custodial interference. The room exploded. Guests gasped. Claire stepped aside as the officers approached. Ian tried to argue, but the handcuffs silenced him. Sandra stood up, demanding answers, shouting that this was a setup. But no one believed her anymore. As they led Ian out, his eyes met mine. You'll regret this, he spat. But I didn't flinch. I held Lily a little tighter and whispered back, no, Ian. You will. The days following Ian's arrest were a strange mix of chaos and calm. News spread fast, local outlets picked up the story almost immediately. Groom arrested at the altar made for irresistible headlines. Photos of Ian in cuffs, still in his tuxedo, appeared online before I even got home. But the real fallout happened behind closed doors, in courtrooms and custody hearings, in whispered phone calls and family implosions. Sandra didn't call me. Not once. But she called Mark. She left him a voicemail that was almost laughable in its delusion. This has gone too far, Mark. Amanda's tearing this family apart over ancient grudges. Ian was just trying to do what's best for that little girl. That little girl. She never said Lily's name. Never referred to her as my daughter. Just a pawn. A possession. Mark didn't respond. He saved the message and sent it straight to our lawyer. Meanwhile, Claire officially cut ties. She filed a restraining order of her own, sent back the ring by courier, and told me later that she burned the wedding dress in her backyard. It felt like watching a ghost go up in smoke, she said. I understood more than she knew. But despite everything, the justice, the closure, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt haunted. I kept replaying the what-ifs in my head. What if the daycare hadn't called? What if Ian had gotten away with it? What if Sandra's influence had gone unchecked? That kind of fear sticks in your bones, even after the danger passes. I started going to therapy. I needed a place to unload the nightmares, the guilt, the knots of anger I'd carried for years. And slowly, I began to untangle them. I told my therapist something one day that surprised even me. I don't think Ian wanted Lily just because he loved her, I said. I think he wanted her because she was mine. Because I built something without them, and they couldn't stand it. That realization hit harder than any courtroom verdict. It wasn't just about the money they stole or the lies they told. It was about control. About power. And when they couldn't control me, they came for what I loved most. But here's the thing, I didn't break. I bent, sure. I shattered in places. But I picked up the pieces and put myself back together. And in doing so, I found a version of me they never expected. Resilient. Steady. Relentless. One evening, a few months later, I was tucking Lily into bed when she looked up at me with those big, curious eyes and asked, "Mommy, who was that man at the wedding?" I froze. She didn't remember the day clearly, thank God, but she remembered the noise. The flashing lights. The tension. I sat beside her and brushed her hair back. "Just someone who forgot how to be kind," I said gently. "But he's not in our lives anymore. And he never will be." She nodded like that answer was enough. And maybe it was. But for me, it was a promise. One I'd make again and again if I had to. Because they tried to erase me. They tried to rewrite the narrative and cast me as the reckless dreamer, the unfit mother, the girl who couldn't survive without them. Instead, I became the woman who outlived their lies. About 2 weeks after the wedding disaster, I got a letter. Not an email. Not a call. An actual handwritten letter in slanted cursive on thick ivory stationery. It was from Sandra. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me for nearly an hour before I opened it. My hands didn't shake, but my heart did. Part of me hoped it was an apology. A confession. Maybe even regret. But I should have known better. It wasn't a letter of remorse. It was a manifesto. She wrote about betrayal, hers, not mine. How I'd humiliated the family, how I'd torn down Ian's future, how I'd turned Lily against her real roots. That phrase, real roots, made bile rise in my throat. And yet, in the midst of all that venom, there was a line that stuck with me. "I always knew you'd ruin him eventually. You just waited until the world was watching." There it was. The truth behind her hate. She didn't believe Ian was innocent, she just resented that I had the power to expose him. Her anger wasn't about what I'd done. It was about the fact that I could. I folded the letter once, calmly, and tossed it into the fireplace. I watched the edges curl and blacken until there was nothing left but ash. After that, something in me shifted. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped letting fear dictate my decisions. And I started to rebuild. Mark and I renewed our vows quietly, just the two of us and Lily, under the giant oak in our backyard. We didn't wear fancy clothes. We didn't invite guests. We just stood there, hand in hand, and promised to keep choosing each other, no matter how many storms tried to pull us apart. Lily wore a flower crown she made herself. She kept giggling every time Mark called me his girl. It was imperfect and beautiful, and it felt like coming home to something I'd built with my own bare hands. In the months that followed, I started speaking at women's shelters. Not about Ian, not directly, but about resilience. About trust and betrayal. About the power in walking away, in starting over, in standing your ground when no one else does. And I met others. Women who had lost custody of their kids to controlling partners. Women who were gaslighted by their own families. Women who were told, over and over, that their instincts were wrong, that their truth didn't matter. We cried. We laughed. We stood in circles and held space for each other in a world that had tried to silence us. One woman, after hearing my story, took my hands and said, "You don't even realize how many lives you've saved by not staying quiet." That's when it clicked. Ian tried to steal Lily, but in the process, he gave me something else, something I never expected. He gave me purpose. He turned my silence into a voice. A loud, unwavering one. It was about a year after the arrest when the final thread began to pull loose, the one Sandra had clung to the most, Ian's image. Even behind bars, she tried to keep it alive, painting him as misunderstood, a visionary just dealt a poor hand. But reputation is fragile, especially when the truth is loud. Ian's business, the one he'd launched with what was once my college fund, had been hemorrhaging money long before the scandal. The wedding debacle accelerated its death. Investors pulled out. Partners distanced themselves. Sandra's connections began to quietly vanish. And then, the audits began. Turns out, Ian had done more than try to manipulate family law. He'd committed financial fraud, investor deceit, false documentation, even tax evasion. Things no one would have seen if he hadn't drawn the world's attention with his theatrics at the altar. Sandra tried to shield him, even during the federal hearings. But one by one, her own ties were severed. Friends she'd known for decades stopped answering calls. Memberships were re-evaluated. She became a pariah in the same circles she used to rule. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some satisfaction watching it unfold. But it wasn't revenge that filled me, it was relief. For once, I didn't have to convince anyone of the truth. It spoke for itself. One day, out of nowhere, I got a call from Sandra's lawyer. She was being sued by several investors for misrepresentation. Turns out she'd co-signed more documents than she remembered. Or maybe she never expected to be caught. They wanted to settle privately. I declined. Let the truth burn through the paper trail the same way it burned through our lives. Let the consequences live where they belong. Mark and I kept our lives quiet. We didn't change addresses or go into hiding, but we made sure every boundary was legally enforced. Lily was enrolled in a new school. Mark got a promotion at work. I started consulting part-time, using my experience to help others navigate legal loopholes families sometimes weaponize. And Lily? She flourished. One night, I watched her perform in a school play. She was a little sunflower in the corner, but she smiled so big, it lit up the room. I sat there in the darkened auditorium, watching her dance, and I realized something. I had broken the cycle. All those years of being gaslit, manipulated, and pushed aside, they ended with me. Lily would never grow up doubting her worth, begging for approval from people who gave love like it was a prize to earn. She would never wonder if her dreams mattered. She would never question if she was enough. Because I had. And I knew better now. As we walked to the car after the show, she slipped her tiny hand into mine and said, "Mommy, I think the sunflower is the best flower." I smiled, brushing a curl from her cheek. It is when it's you. It's been 3 years since Ian's wedding turned into a headline. Since handcuffs replaced vows. Since Sandra's grip on our lives finally slipped away. Ian is serving a sentence longer than anyone expected. Turns out, his financial crimes went deeper than we knew. The court uncovered years of falsified ledgers, fake investors, even offshore transfers he couldn't explain. I never celebrated his downfall, but I did feel the steady pulse of justice. Not revenge. Just rightness. Sandra faded into a quiet life somewhere in Arizona, I think. We haven't spoken since her letter, the one that tried to twist guilt into ownership. She never apologized. I stopped waiting for it. What I didn't stop doing was healing. That part was slower, messier. Healing looks less like joy and more like quiet mornings and steady breaths. It's saying no to triggers and yes to rest. It's learning how to let go of anger, not for their sake, but mine. Mark and I built a life that feels soft. Not weak. Safe. Gentle. Honest. On Lily's 6th birthday, we held a picnic in the park. Just a few close friends, a homemade cake, and a blanket under the old sycamore tree. She wore a crown of daisies and called herself Queen of the Sky. Mark carried her on his shoulders while she waved to squirrels like they were royal subjects. I sat back, camera in hand, and tried to capture it all. Not just the picture, but the feeling. The way laughter spilled through the air like sunlight. The way Lily's eyes sparkled with a kind of light that no bitterness could dim. The way Mark looked at me, like he knew we'd survived something, and that survival itself was sacred. I used to think the most important thing was proving them wrong. Showing Sandra and Ian that I didn't need their money, their permission, or their pity. But now, I don't think about proving anything. Now, I just think about protecting this peace. Holding it gently in my palms like the miracle it is. Living in a home where love isn't conditional. Where my daughter's laughter is louder than any ghost from my past. Sometimes, after Lily falls asleep, I stand in her doorway and just watch her breathe. Her chest rising and falling in that steady rhythm of innocence. And I whisper the same thing every time. They didn't win. Because they didn't. They tried to erase my future before it began. They tried to steal my child, my dignity, my name. But I held on. Not perfectly. Not easily. But long enough to see this version of life bloom. And it's more beautiful than I ever imagined.